It's Monday night. You've finished up work for the day and go for a leisurely stroll to clear your head. The air is crisp and refreshing. You can hear the birds chirping in the distance and are feeling at one with nature. Life is good. But within an instant, your perfect calm is broken by a strange sight. Something protruding from the ground in front of you. It appears to be a bone. Upon closer inspection, you realize that it's not just an ordinary bone. It's a human femur. This was reality for Christine Ross when she took her dog, Ruka, for a walk back in February 2nd, 2009, in West Mesa, New Mexico. Her grim discovery would lead to the unveiling of 11 dead bodies in a mass grave, now collectively known as the West Mesa Murders. Due to the sheer number of victims and the layers of mystery surrounding their murders and the burial, this was one of the most disturbing cases that Albuquerque police had ever seen. It took medical examiners nearly a year to identify these severely decomposed bodies, but strides were eventually made. All of the victims were female and most of them were Hispanic. Those identified who were reported missing disappeared between the years of 2001 and 2005, and they ranged in age from 15 to 32. All but one of the victims had known ties to adult activity, which helped police narrow down the potential suspects quite significantly. Even with all of this information coming to light, the murderer, known as the West Mesa Bone Collector, has not been found to this very day. The FBI still has a $100,000 reward for information leading to the murderer's capture, one that has gone unclaimed for 13 years and counting. After Christine Ross placed her call to the Albuquerque police reporting the human bone she had found, things quickly spiraled into one of the most horrifying scenes the city had ever seen. Detectives spent the following weeks combing the underdeveloped area of West Mesa to uncover all 11 graves. The mass burial ground held the remains of 2 teens and 9 adults, one of whom was 4 months pregnant when she had been murdered. 10 of the 11 victims were adult workers or victims of this thing, the exception being a 15-year-old Jamie Barella, who was found buried next to her 27-year-old cousin, Evelyn Salazar. The 2 women had been reported missing after walking to a local park in 2004. Whereas some of the women were reported missing and left behind gravely concerned families, many others had fractured family relationships or had run away from home years earlier before they had died. This led to very sparse details regarding their locations before they went missing and made information collection much more difficult. Most of the women hadn't even been reported missing at the time that the remains were found. The West Mesa Bone Collector had carefully chosen his victims, what was allowed his gruesome murder spree to go undetected for several years. Satellite imagery was employed to try to retroactively discover any evidence of tampering on the remote area where the mass grave was. A 2004 image showed a set of tire tracks that led directly to the area. The tire tracks are generally believed to have belonged to the murderer himself. But unfortunately, by 2009, residential development had erased any hope of tangible automobile evidence. Despite a general lack of evidence and a trail that had gone long cold by this point in time, there are 2 primary suspects that stand out amongst the crowd, only one of whom is still alive today. Joseph Blea was already in prison when the discovery of the West Mesa murders was made, but he became a prime suspect when his ex-wife had contacted police stating she believed he could be the killer. Her daughter had found women's clothing and jewelry in their home, and some of the victims' families made a point of acknowledging the murdered women were missing jewelry that they had routinely worn. On top of this, Blea didn't exactly have a clean record. Police encountered Blea nearly 140 times between 1990 and 2009, often in different rings for adult activity. In 2003, when he was arrested for exposing himself to a woman, they found electrical tape and rope in his vehicle. Mia was also reported of stalking these workers during and after the time that the West Mesa murders took place. His cellmate said Blia admitted to knowing many of the women who were killed, and even had a personal history with one of them. He had apparently struck one of them for attempting to steal his money. And despite these ties, there was ultimately a lack of evidence to pin the murders on Joseph Blia. He is currently serving a 90-year sentence for multiple cases from the 1980s and the 1990s. The second primary suspect is Lorenzo Montoya. Similar to Blia, he was known to pick up at these types of women and hurt them too. His ex-girlfriend recounted that he used to beat her and threaten to kill her and bury her in lime. In 2006, Montoya had hired a girl and things took a turn for the worst. After an argument presumably broke out between the two, he had strangled her to death. Soon after, her boyfriend had arrived on the scene. When he was met with aggression from Montoya, the boyfriend shot and killed him in self-defense. Adding to suspicion, Montoya was holding a flashlight when he had died, while his victim was wrapped up in a blanket near his SUV. Although Lorenzo Montoya clearly fit the description, and the timing of the events matched up perfectly with the West Mesa killings, there has never been definitive evidence gathered to pin him as the West Mesa bone collector. While these two were considered the primary suspects, it's important to remember that the case is still open. There's a very realistic possibility that neither of these two men were responsible for the West Mesa murders, which means the real murderer could still be out there right now. Considering the amount of time between the actual crimes committed and the discovery of the bodies, they could be anywhere by now. There's no reason to believe that they've dropped their vicious habits either. Who's to say there isn't another mass grave being created as we speak, lying dormant until another passerby randomly discovers something out of the ordinary? Keep your eyes peeled. What do you think? Were Joseph Blia and Lorenzo Montoya the West Mesa bone collector? Which one do you believe did it and why? Or was it someone else entirely? Let me know your thoughts down below. And thanks so much for listening to this week's story. As always, let me know what topics you would like to see. I love reading your suggestions. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'll catch you back here next Wednesday with another mystery.